Hi, I'm Kyle, and David Bowie is one of my favorite musicians, which shouldn't be shocking because if you happen to be a fan of music at all, that opinion is almost universal. Not only has Bowie remained relevant over the span of 60 plus years, but he's made arguably some of the most influential and acclaimed music of all time. The way he moved as an artist was hard to imitate, as he always bounced from one thing to the next. You could never really predict what he was going to do sonically from record to record. But even with the ever-changing formula of changing the formula, whatever genre caught his ear, he somehow almost always managed to pull it off. On one record, you'll get glam ballads about a rock and roll star who veers too close to the sun, and on another, you'll get industrial writings from a world where art is outlawed. And it doesn't just stop at the music either. For a little while, Bowie would create full-on characters to accompany his records. There was Ziggy Stardust, a Thin White Duke, Aladdin Sane, Major Tom. He was a creative powerhouse, and with each song came a story, and with each record came a character. It is incredible to see how Bowie transforms the act of music into a full-on play production. Maybe he should be an actor. If you know Bowie well enough, you know that he also had a pretty long and decent repertoire as a screen actor alongside his music career. He played a character in Twin Peaks, he was Nikola Tesla in Christopher Nolan's The Prestige, and in arguably his most memorable role, Jareth from Labyrinth. Not only was Bowie a great musician, but he was also a great actor, and while his list of roles may look a bit smaller in comparison to, say, Justin Timberlake, that didn't really matter. Bowie's talent ranged greatly, which is why today I thought I'd go over 3 Bowie films that range from cheesy to outright great, all 3 showcasing Bowie in different genre roles, and all 3 of which are unique in their own ways. But enough introducing, let's just talk about it. The Linguini Incident is a 1991 romance, crime, and dark comedy film starring Rosanna Arquette alongside, of course, David Bowie. Production originally completed in 1990, and the way they toured and promoted it was a bit confusing. It seemed the director or the production company behind the movie was not too sure of how to edit the film or even how to promote it. There were apparently 6 different cuts of the movie that screened internationally under 5 different names, so it kind of made trying to keep track of it a bit hard at the time. Here in the States, we know the film as the Linguini Incident, as evidenced by the, weird and off-putting VHS cover, but if you happen to be in Europe or any other country, you might know the movie as Shagorama, The Robbery, Houdini and Company, or my personal favorite, The Incident. Ah yes, nothing screams rom-com more than The Robbery or The Incident. There was also recently a re-release of this movie on Blu-ray that has an entirely different cut as well. I don't know what version or copy I have, I just know that from my viewing of this edit that it wasn't my particular cup of tea. The film follows Monty, a sleazy bartender at a trendy upscale New York restaurant with a lot of Picasso imagery for some reason. We're told that he's recently moved to America and that he's trying his damnedest to get a woman to marry him so he can get his green card.
Tony, I've got to get my green card.
Or that's what the movie has you think for the first hour or so before completely dumping this plot device to make the finale a bit more interesting. In the creepy and weird process of him trying to do that, he captures the attention of one of the waitresses named Lucy, who happens to be an aspiring escape artist and idolizes the late and great magician Harry Houdini. After a weird and uncomfortable scene where Lucy almost accidentally hangs herself while practicing one of her escapes, she and Monty become acquainted, which is also done in a very weird and kind of rapey scene. We also meet Lucy's friend, Vivian, a fashion designer who makes bras with knives for self-defense and who in her first 5 minutes on screen breaks the Bechdel test.
God, look how cute he is.
The film drags for a while as it tries its best to set up motivations for our characters and persuade the audience as to why Lucy and Monty are actually a really great match for each other, despite Monty being the biggest red flag in the world. There's also a separate plot where they rob the restaurant, but the way they present the crime is incredibly bizarre and doesn't really offer much plot-wise because nothing happens to the characters or the business. It's only really used in the movie as a comedic punchline and to help tie up the all too predictable and underwhelming ending, which could have just worked better if they spent more time on it. And that's probably my biggest complaint with this movie, is that while it boasts an hour-and-a-half long runtime and does have a lot of interesting things going for its characters, there's just way too many things happening back to back to really give me a chance to sit down and process what's going on. On one hand, you have Monty wanting to marry Lucy for a green card, which could very well be a movie by itself. On the other hand, you have Monty, Lucy, and Vivian rob a restaurant, which also could be a movie by itself. And then you have this escape artist story right in the middle of it all, which just completely overwhelms the whole thing. I understand the purpose of having it in the movie, as it tries to parallel Harry and Beth Houdini's love story with Monty and Lucy's, but I think Harry's was just a tiny bit less creepy. But that's not me saying that this film is terrible. Far from it, actually. There's plenty of moments in the Linguini Incident that had me bursting out laughing. Its bizarre and off-the-wall way of telling jokes reminded me of Twin Peaks in some aspects.
Let's have the gun.
one gun.
While this is a straight-to-video movie, I was surprised to see how creative some of the shot composition was, especially the scene after they rob the restaurant. And of course, the acting here is phenomenal. Everybody is giving just the right amount of cheese and not taking themselves all too seriously. I see a lot of people calling this film a hidden gem in Bowie's filmography, and while I disagree, I can understand. It's got charm, which I can't say about a lot of other celebrity rom-coms. The Linguini Incident's confusing nature makes sitting down and trying to view the film a bit of a chore, but its excess means of telling a story has guaranteed a spot in the front of my brain for at least a little while. If I were to give this film a rating, it would be a solid 6 out of 10. Next up on the chopping block is 1983's The Hunger, an erotic goth horror film starring Catherine Deneuve, David Bowie, and Susan Sarandon. And for a film with such a star-studded cast, I was surprised to see how little it actually performed. Vampires are almost always a relevant genre in media because you could do basically anything with them. You want to do a love story about a vampire and a random teenage girl? Sure, go ahead, that'll make $1 billion. You want to write a few books about a journalist interviewing a vampire? That sounds cool, we'll make a movie and a show out of it. Bowie pretty much played a vampire for the rollout of Station to Station back in the 60s, so to see that this was both a flop critically and commercially, I was a bit worried about what I was diving into, and if I could be completely honest, yeah, it wasn't that great. It follows Miriam and John, two vampires that pose as classical music teachers in the middle of New York. They first met in Greece like 200 years ago, where she promises John eternal life if he agrees to be her lover. Things are going great until suddenly John starts to lose sleep and age rapidly. After watching a TV program where a gerontologist named Sarah talks about the same phenomenon but in primates, John heads out to the medical center she works at in an attempt to reverse his rapid aging. But after thinking that he's out of his mind, rightfully so, she leaves him to rot in the waiting room. Literally, he ages like 50 years in the waiting room. Upon returning home, he murders one of their students in the hopes that maybe that will help. Spoiler alert, it doesn't, and they never find a cure.
John?
And then in a progressive twist for an 80s movie, Sarah shows up at their house to hopefully study John, and upon returning a few days later, Miriam hooks up with her and also turns her into a vampire. But the way she does it is interesting. See, instead of sucking her blood, she injects her own blood into her. Almost like a drug of sorts. If it wasn't obvious, this movie is about addiction, and that's like the ending. It's a movie about addiction, and it's really, really lame. I will give this movie extra points for visually showing a same-sex hookup in a time when homosexuality was deemed illegal, though. Now, don't get me wrong, it's got way more flair and style than the Linguini Incident. The makeup work in this movie is fantastic, the music is haunting and features a good old Bauhaus song, which would leave any goth slotting praise at the screen, and some of the shots in here are genuinely beautiful. But that's all it's got going for it. The way the film is sequenced reminded me a lot of Oppenheimer at points, seeing how sporadically it jumps around to tell its story, but I don't think the film is complex enough to really justify doing so. Another issue that I have is that this film is over an hour and a half long, but I feel like it very easily could have been less. It is a slog to get through. Now, I am all for open ambience and spacing in a movie. One of my favorite films of all time is Blue from the Three Colors trilogy, and the way that film uses its space to evoke the isolation that the main character feels is truly masterful. The only time I felt that space was justified in The Hunger, however, was when Miriam was left by herself after John became a mummy, and even then it feels like it fumbles trying to do so. For how much thought that I know was put into literally every other aspect of this movie, I was surprised by how flimsy the final product ended up being. It felt more like I sat through an elongated drug PSA than I did a postmodern highbrow vampire movie. The Hunger tries to be a fascinating take on the vampire genre, but gets too caught up in its artistic flourishes to leave you with anything memorable, which sucks given how perfectly everything else fell into place. I think I'll give this one a 4 out of 10. The last one for today's video is 1983's Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, a World War II drama film starring Tom Conti, Ryuichi Sakamoto, and of course David Bowie. Out of the 3 films I've talked about today, this one is the most critically praised. It's screened at Cannes and was in competition for the Palme d'Or, arguably the most prestigious award for film. It even got a Criterion release. But that doesn't matter to me. For I, kyleslameart, am the ultimate understander of art, and as thus, it will be granted down to me as to whether or not this film is good. I wish humans would go extinct. Great movie, though. Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence follows Lieutenant Colonel John Lawrence, just one of many prisoners held at a camp in Gov. The difference between him and the others, however, is that he knows how to speak Japanese and is basically given the role of translator. In doing so, he tries his best to bridge together his beliefs as an Englishman with the Japanese. One of the men that he ends up befriending is Sergeant Hara, who questions why they didn't all want to die from shame from being caught, which could help spell out the thesis of this film quite early on. The film focuses on the clashing of not only cultural beliefs between the English and the Japanese, but of military styles as well. The same can be said about the camp's leader, Captain Yonoi, who from the very start of the film you see as a very fierce and brutal man that tries his best to honor the code of the samurai, and in doing so trickles down pain and punishment not only on the prisoners, but on his own men as well. But almost as quickly as we establish his character, it's then challenged when he develops a romantic fascination with one of his prisoners, Jack Sellers, a bright major whom from the very point he was captured shows nothing but anger towards the Japanese military. And instead of seething with anger back against him, Yonoi can't help but to be infatuated. He makes sure that he's cared for, he watches him as he sleeps, and he asks about him all the time, which is pretty crazy.
Why are you so interested in him?
This film does something that a lot of anti-war films can't do, which is to humanize those that war considers to be the enemy. And as the film marches on, you start to see how that affects Yonoi and in turn his leadership. I'd love to continue because this is a really beautifully put together film with a lot to dissect, but I feel it's important for you to go out and view it yourself. Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence is a brutal watch to say the least, but the way that brutality is captured is nothing short of brilliant. It showcases the humanity that lies in the darkest corners of war, a perspective that we still lack in a lot of our conversations about this very subject. Does the film run a bit long? Yeah. Do I feel that despite how beautifully put together the soundtrack is, that it could be a bit distracting at points?
I was dreaming about this woman.
Christ. Sounds like she cut it off.
Yeah. Do I think that the Japanese actors could have been directed better when they speak English?
You shall stay inside your barracks for 48 hours.
Almost every single time. But even with its flaws, Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence stands out on its own as an exceptional piece of cinema that I wish more people talked about. I'm gonna give this one an 8 out of 10. If there's anything to really take away from this video, it's that no matter what role Bowie was tasked with doing, he was always electric. He knew how to put out a good performance alongside arguably some of the greatest living actors and actresses of our time, even if the movie sucked or was convoluted. Which is really impressive for a guy mostly known for his music. So many artists try their hands at different art forms, whether that be acting or music or comedy, and it feels like no matter how hard they try, they're always destined to fail. But Bowie stands as one of the few who is able to bridge that gap, and because of that, his work is still studied and lauded with praise to this day. As I'm reading out the script of this video, it's been almost 10 years since Bowie died, but because of how extensive his work as an artist was, his influence reigns supreme, and it doesn't really matter where you look. Whether it be through the lens of a camera or singing his heart out on stage, Bowie was and will always be one of a kind.
God bless you all. Sayonara. Till next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.